Hey, if you're new to Limber, this is the best place to start. This video is going to run you through all the basic features about as quickly as possible with a little demonstration of character rigging that I do, and you can then hopefully watch and learn from that and take some of those principles and apply them to your own characters. Towards the end, I'm going to cover FK, and there's going to be a section about how to scale your characters as well. So let's get going. I've got this character which I designed in Illustrator, and you can see that I've got these separate layers here, and I've moved the anchor points on the layers and parented them one to another so that it's kind of got the torso sort of pre-rigged, ready for animation. That's really very simple basic stuff which you can find tutorials on that anywhere else on YouTube or whatever, so I'm not going to go through all that. But what we're going to do is select the arms and the legs and then just turn down their opacity so that we know that they're just reference layers like that. And then in the Limber panel, I'm going to make sure I've got legs selected in this first drop down and that I've got taper selected in the second drop down, and then I'm going to click new. It's going to ask me to name the limb, and this left is fine. I can start with the left hand side of the character. I'll click OK. It's going to generate 3 new layers in the timeline and open the effect controls panel if we didn't already have it open. So you'll see that one of these 3 new layers is called leg or arm, if that's what you're making. That's the actual rendering layer. And then the other 2 are these guide layers that are controllers. So if I move the controllers around, that changes the limb layer itself. These controllers are quite big, especially for this character, so I can change the size of them by selecting one and then clicking on this plus minus size button in Limber like that. I want mine to get smaller, so if I hold down Alt they'll do that. Then I just need to sort of position them where I want them to go. The hip might want to go there somewhere, and then the end controller, the ankle, I'm going to shift parent to the left foot so that it goes to exactly where the left foot's anchor point is. Then I'm going to unparent it like that. With the end controller selected, in the effects controls panel, I'm going to twirl down all these properties in this Limber effect, and then you can play around with them and sort of see what works for you. So first thing I'm going to do is change these 3 sizes so it's about the right kind of width along its length. The middle size maybe something like that, and then the end size maybe something like that. And then let's check out the length. So the upper length is obviously a bit long like that, so let's just pull that back, and then the lower length needs to go up a bit until it just starts to be straight like that. That's pretty good. So for the colors, you can sample directly from your artwork like that if you want, and you'll see that these split properties here will allow that kind of color split to move up and down along the 2 halves of the limb, and then this rounding property will sort of round it off in this faux 3D way if you're doing that, if your limb is kind of foreshortened in perspective or whatever. I actually don't want that, and of course my character's only really got these color changes down at the bottom, so I'll set my middle color to be the same as the upper color. I'll set the upper split to 0 because it's not doing anything, and then the lower split I'll set where I want that, and then I'm going to sample this skin color for the bottom of the limb. Now that that's all set up pretty much how I want it, I can select one of the layers and click duplicate, and it's going to ask me for an alternative name for the other side. Obviously that's going to be right, and it's made an absolute duplicate of that limb, so it's in the same place in everything. I'm going to want to move this new hip controller over to one side so that it goes where it needs to, and then this right ankle, I'm going to do the same thing again and shift parent that to the right foot and then unparent it like that. And I can straight away see that this limb is going to need to be shorter because that hip is a little bit lower than the other one. And also I can see that it's bending out the wrong way. So again, I'll need to just twirl down all these properties, and the clockwise property inside the dynamics group is what controls which way the knee goes. So if I dial that over from 100% to minus 100%, that leg is now going to bend out the right way. And I actually want my other leg to bend the same way, so I'm going to come back to my left ankle controller and set the clockwise to minus 100% on that one too, just so that bends out the same way. Just undo that. So this right ankle is going to need to have these lengths just reduced a little bit, just to make sure that that leg kind of goes straight like that. And now that everything kind of looks good, I'll parent these two start controllers, the hip layers, to my character's Illustrator hips layer like that. And now when I move my character around, I can see that, you know, everything's going to kind of animate in a predictable way how I want it to go. So again, I'll just undo that. So really now those two start controls are probably not going to be needed much more. So I can pull them down to the bottom of my timeline layer stack and just turn them off like that. As long as they're parented to the hip layers, that's all cool. I might want to move the actual rendering limb layers to the right place in the layer stack as well. So probably best just simply match where the Illustrator layers were. So this left leg will go next to the left leg layer, and then the right leg I'll drag down next to the right leg layer. And that leaves me with these two controllers at the top. Let's show you what happens when we parent a foot. So if I take this left foot and parent it to this left ankle controller and then move the ankle controller, you'll see that this foot is lifting up and moving around with the leg, but it's not rotating with the leg. It's staying parallel to the ground plane. And sometimes that's what you want. If you're in the middle of a walk cycle and your foot is traveling along the ground, you'd want it to stay flat. But not always. So this, in the dynamics group, this rotate end property is something that you can dial up, and when it's on 100%, then your end controllers will be aligned to the bottom half of the leg like that, which is, you know, what you would want if you were kind of in the other part of the walk cycle. Because my character is sort of standing at this point, I don't want that, so I'm just going to undo and put that back where it was. But that shows you how that rotate end property works, and we'll talk about it again when we get to the hands. There's another type of limb that Limber can generate apart from these tapers, and that's called a bone. So if I go and change this type drop down to bone, and I'll change the name drop down to arm, and then click new, we'll start with the left one again. Now I'm going to get another new limb, but this is a different type of limb. So again, I've still got the limb layer and these two controllers, and I can move my controllers around and place them where they need to go. But the bones don't respond to a lot of the properties in the Limber effect. They don't respond to any of the colors or the splits or the rounding, and they don't respond to those three sizes because they don't taper in the same way as the taper limbs. They do respond to the two length properties, of course, and everything in the dynamics group and in the forward kinematics group. And they also respond to this bone curvature property, which is the one property that tapers don't respond to. That's just there so that you can get this bendy sort of style noodle limb if that's what you want. Now for this character I don't want that, so I'm going to undo that. And then I'm going to make these controls a bit smaller again, and I'm going to place them sort of roughly where they need to go. But this is a bit difficult to style because this limb layer is so fat. So because bones are designed to be as fast as possible in the sense that they render very fast, they preview very fast, they really are just a shape layer with a path with 3 points on it that correspond to the 3 points along your limb. And because they're as simple as that, the way to style them is by styling the shape layer itself. So with this limb layer selected, I can actually just change the properties up here with the sort of, you know, normal native After Effects controls, and I can color pick again up here like that to make the color match the character. And then let's change the length, of course. So we'll put the end controller somewhere roughly where it needs to go. Clockwise again is the wrong way around, so let's put that on minus 100%. And if I just set these to something like 90 and 90, then I'll see that that now is looking pretty much how I want it to go. Just need to nudge that layer in a little bit to put it inside the shoulders, and that's looking pretty good. But the beauty of the fact that we can edit the stroke properties itself inside the limb layer here is that I can also take advantage of the new tapered strokes in After Effects 2020 and change this taper property. So I could change the end length to 100 and the end width to say 50, and then I'm going to get this tapered stroke-based limb, which looks quite nice like that. There is another way to make bones, which is even easier than clicking new and then moving the controls around and styling them, and that is to simply draw a path with 3 points like this, and then click this path to bone button with it selected. Let's just call this test, and you'll see that Limbo goes through a whole sequence of steps, does the work, and that now I've literally just got the path that I drew, but it's animatable like that. So I don't actually want to do that, because what would make more sense in this instance, if I delete those layers, is to get the actual path from my Illustrator layer itself, and it's going to be positioned exactly right. So that would be her right arm, which is here. So let's just dial the opacity of that layer back up to 100% like that. Then I'm going to use this create shapes from vector layer command to turn it into a shape layer, because we need to use a shape layer. Click the path to bone button. This time I'll call this one right, and Limbo's going to basically make that limb exactly where that path was. Let's make these controllers a little bit smaller. What we might want to do now is make sure that this arm is tapered in the same way that the other one is. And we could go inside the limb layer and change the taper of that stroke again, but we don't really need to, because Limbo has ways of copying the properties of one limb over to another. So if we select the original arm with the tapered stroke already on it, that's the left arm, and I click this copy button, and then I come back to my right arm and I click paste, you'll see that we now get that tapered stroke. But you might have noticed that it also made the arm a little bit shorter. And the reason for that is that if we just use the paste button in its native state, it will paste all of the properties from the Limbo effect as well, which we don't necessarily want, and I didn't want those lengths to copy over, because I want it exactly as it was with the artwork. So if I just undo that, if I click the paste button, but this time if I hold down the Alt key when I do it, it will effectively replicate the limb layer and all the changes that we've made to the limb layer, but it will keep the Limbo properties as they were in the destination limb. Okay, so it hasn't changed the length of it, but it has changed the stroke type inside that limb layer. Now what I'm going to do is drag these arm layers to where they need to go. So I'll put the right arm next to the right arm and the left arm next to the old left arm. And these two shoulder start controllers will want to be parented to the torso. And if they're in the right place, I can also put those to the bottom of the stack and turn them off, just like I did with the hips. And we've now got the beginnings of an IK character. So if I rotate my torso, you'll see that the arms move. But let's parent the hands to the end controllers of the arm. So if I just zoom in, you'll see that if I were to take this end controller for the right wrist and parent the right hand to it, which is there, that's all well and good. But when I start to move my controller around, that hand isn't rotating with the limb, just like we showed you with the foot. And that's something that I definitely want to happen. But if I turn up the rotate end property, it's going to mess around with the angle of my hand. So what I really wanted to do was make sure that the rotate end property was dialed up before I did the parenting. So let's unparent this hand from the right wrist, select the wrist and turn up the rotate end property, and then reparent the right hand to the right wrist. And now I'll find that as I move that wrist controller around, the hand aligns just how I want it to. And I can go and do the same thing with the other one down here. So this left wrist, I dial up the rotate end property. Then I find my left hand, which is there, and I'll parent that to the left wrist. And now when I move those arms around, the hands are doing what I need them to do. At this stage, it might be an idea to just get rid of all the old Illustrator limbs. So I'll literally delete them from the timeline. There's also that shape layer, which I drew the sort of 3-point path on earlier. We don't need that, turn that off. And then the outlines layer, that we used to generate the path to bone, I'll delete that as well. That's just sort of tidying up my timeline. And now we're at the stage where we have a pretty much complete IK character, and I could animate this left ankle, for example, set a keyframe for position and come here and maybe move it over to here somewhere, so she's kind of taking a step forwards. If I just pull out that motion path, then she's going to lift that leg up and move it forwards, and then perhaps as we do so, I might want to make these hips move forwards as well, so the weight kind of comes over like that. But you'll see that as that happens, the hands aren't moving along with the rest of the rig, and so that looks a little bit strange. One way around that is to parent the wrist controllers to some part of the body that's moving. In this case, that would be the hips. So I could parent those wrist controllers to the hips, and then as we scrub through, you'll see that as she moves forward, those hands kind of go along with the body. And that's a legitimate rigging strategy, but sometimes it's not what you want later on, because if I wanted to rotate those hips, you know, I'm now going to find that her arms rotate along with them, and sometimes that's not what you want. So let's just unparent those from the hips and talk about a different way to do it, which is using Limba's FK or forward kinematics properties. So IK, inverse kinematics, which is everything we've been dealing with so far, is where you dictate the pose of the limb by placing the two controllers and letting the computer figure out the angles and the position of the elbow in between them. And that's obviously what you want for your legs most of the time, but it's not always what you want for your arms. The other way of doing things is FK, which is a bit like just parenting two layers together and then changing their rotation properties, because on FK you rotate one half of the limb and then the other, and that dictates where the end of the limb goes. If you're animating feet or say hands that grabbing something, you're going to want to do that on IK. But if you're animating an arm that's swinging in a walk cycle, then it can be a lot easier to do that on FK, especially if you've, say, got your character's body going up and down as it goes over the passing position. You're going to find that the arms kind of get carried along with that motion of the body, unlike on IK, as we just saw, where they get kind of left behind. So if I come over to this right wrist here and dial up the FK property, you're going to see that the arm swings down to this straight down pose, which is dictated by these angles here. So the upper FK is on 180 by default, pointing down, and I can adjust that, and then the lower FK is there. But you'll also see obviously that this hand is getting left behind. So I'll just undo a few times to get back to where we were before. And if we want to use FK with sort of hand and feet layers, then we need to generate a new type of controller to have those hands or feet layers parented to. And the best way to do that is to set your FK to 0, select some part of the limb, and then just click on the Add FK button. And Limba will reparent any layers that were parented to the IK controller, that's the end controller that we already had, to this new FK controller. If you had your FK set to 0 when you did that, it's important to be on 0% FK. Then once you've added that FK controller, which we can see just has the same name as the end controller with FK on the end of it, you can now dial up your FK and you'll find that the hand kind of moves along with the rest of the limb. So these FK controllers that Limba adds are not something that we would animate or adjust in any way at all. They're literally just a layer for hands and feet layers to be parented to and get carried along with. And when we're on 0 FK or full IK, then those FK controllers are always going to be at the exact same position as our normal end controllers. So if you later decide that you don't actually want to use FK at all because you're not needing it, then you can remove those controllers, and similarly the script will automatically reparent any layers that are parented to the FK controllers back to the normal end controllers. The way to remove those FK controllers is not by simply deleting them. However, you need to alt click on the Add FK button, and again that's best done when FK is set to 0. So if I wanted to remove this FK controller, I've got my FK set to 0, I can hold Alt and click on Add FK. And now I'll find that Limber has reparented the hand to the IK controller and removed that FK controller from the set of limb layers. But actually I do want that FK controller. I'm just going to show you, just showing you how they get removed. So now obviously if we dial up the FK to 100%, again, we do have this sort of silly pose where the arm's just going straight down, which is not what we want. And I can set it manually with these rotation values here, but Limber has a way of automatically matching FK poses to IK poses and vice versa with these two buttons here, match FK to IK and match IK to FK. So obviously at this point I want to match my FK to my IK, so I'll just click on that button and Limber just basically figures out what these angles need to be in order to match where the IK end controller is. So now when my character moves across, we'll see that that arm is carried across perfectly as if it was just parented layers kind of thing. The other one's not, because we still haven't got that one onto FK just yet. So the nice thing about Limber is that we can animate between FK and IK, or blend as we call it. And because that's a keyframeable property, we can do that seamlessly over a period of time, several frames. And that same ability to blend, have a kind of almost transition between a certain state of the character and another, it's carried through into some of the other properties in the dynamics group. So we can also blend the clockwise property from facing left to facing right, and we can blend the rotate end property for maybe our feet when they pick up off the ground. We don't have to just simply have them on or off in terms of whether they auto rotate. We can actually animate that property as they lift up or whatever. We could use them as switches if we want to, just simply use hold keyframes for 0 and 100%. Sometimes that works better, but you have the option of blending seamlessly with Limber. So I'm just going to go ahead and click the other wrist and add an FK controller, and then I'm going to match the FK to the IK like that. And then now I'll find that when I dial up the FK, we don't see any difference because it's perfectly matching the pose. And then as the character moves along, those arms now get carried along. Okay, so there's a couple more things I want to show you before I wrap up. The first of those is this anti-pop property here, which automatically smooths out sort of snaps and pops in the animation of your limbs. What you can find is that the maths of limbs going from fully straight to bent tends to be such that you have to really fine tune how you place your end controllers in terms of their distance from the start controller in order to not get these kind of snappy moments where it looks like the limb has been suddenly pulled taut and straight. So I've just headed to the beginning of my animation here, and you can see that even just between the first frame and the second, where I've lifted up that ankle controller, a tiny amount, we've suddenly got this quite big bend in the leg. And that's the kind of thing we're talking about. So if we select the left ankle controller, and then just on this frame where the sort of pop, if you like, is first occurring, if I dial up the anti-pop, you'll see that it massively smooths and straightens that leg artificially, so that now the change is not as drastic from straight to beginning to bend. And if I just preview this animation, let me set the work area, you can see that lifting up is kind of smoother. If I just go back to the anti-pop 0, you'll see it was quite jerky before. So that's what the anti-pop does. The other thing I want to show you is how to scale your characters. And the best way to do that is using what we call a master controller. It's not a technical term. So if I make a new null, you can place that wherever you want. It's quite common to place it at the bottom of the character, but it might be at the center. And then I'll just rename this master like that. And I'm going to need to make sure that all the parts of my character that aren't parented to anything else are parented to that null. It's like I wanted to sort of set up a kind of stick to move the character around on. So my hips is currently my sort of top level of the character rig, so I'll parent that to the master null, but I'll also need to parent the end controllers. So my wrist controllers and my ankle controllers will all need to be parented to that master controller as well, like that. So now what should happen is if I move my master controller, my character just moves around with it like that. We haven't got a foot layer parented there properly, so where's that foot layer? There, yeah, that should be parented to the right ankle like that. So then once you've got your sort of master controller set up, reveal its scale, and then you're going to need to expression link the properties in your end controllers to that master scale. And the property that we're talking about is this size scale here. So if I were to scale up my character at the moment before anything's been linked, you can see that it's getting bigger, but the sort of size of the limbs isn't scaling with it. So let's just undo that, and then I'll hold Alt and click on this size scale property here. I'm just on the left ankle at the moment. That's going to make me a new expression. Then I need to link that expression, that value of the size scale, to the master null's scale. They need to be both the same, both 100%. And then I'll just go and do the same thing for the other layers. So once you've got all those size scale properties expression linked up to your master null's scale, if you're only using the taper limbs and you're not using FK, that's all you'll need to do. And everything will scale as you scale up that master null, as you can see our legs are doing. But FK controllers need a little bit of extra work, and so do bones. So our arms are going to need that. So I'll just show you that on this FK controller, I'm going to need to just simply expression link my scale of the FK controller to that master scale like that. And I need to do the same thing for the other FK controller. So we'll just drag the pick whip over there like that. And then we'll find that the hands get bigger along with the rest of the rig. And then the other thing is to expression link the stroke width property that's in the bones. You can't use a sort of straightforward constant stroke width expression for this because the layer itself isn't actually scaling, so that won't work. So what you'll need to do is find the stroke width property and then expression link that to the size scale of the, expression link that to the scale of the master null. But then we're just going to need to make a little adjustment to that, which is to add a few terms. So if we just put value times, which is the asterisk, and then that property, and then at the end divided by 100, we'll find that that stroke width now scales up and down along with the master null. So it's going off the top of the frame, but you can see that that arm is kind of getting bigger and smaller, exactly as it should do with the rest of the limb, unlike the one on the other side. Once you've done one, you can just copy and paste that expression onto the other limb, or we could use the limber copy and paste buttons. In fact, that would be easier. So let's just take the right arm and then hit copy, and then the left arm and Alt paste, and that's now got the same expression automatically applied to it. That's really one of the best things about working with Limber, is that ability to copy and paste like that. So now both those arms are going to scale as we want them to. I'll just set that scale back to 100. So that's it for now. We've taken you through most of the basic features in this video, but there is a massive amount of potential sort of buried in that rig and pose button that we didn't touch on at all. And if you want to know how to rig limbs themselves with your own artwork or the artwork of an illustrator, then I'd suggest you watch the second video in the Limber training series, which is on the aescripts YouTube channel, where we're going to go through all that stuff. You can also find the Limber user guide online at limber.stevekirby.co.uk, or if you click the help button in the panel, there's another button inside there which will just take you straight there. So thanks for watching. See you next time.